Welcome, welcome. It's so wonderful to have you all here tonight. Thank you for being here. So my name is Marie Berry, and together with my colleague Erica Chenoweth, I am the co-director of the Inclusive Global Leadership Initiative's Summer Institute. Tonight, we are thrilled to host you to hear from Carmen Perez, the national co-chair of the Women's March, who will be sharing her deep knowledge about resistance, organizing, and movement building with you. The event is part of the Inclusive Global Leadership Initiative, which we affectionately call IGLE, which is an effort to catalyze research, education, and programming dedicated to advancing the work that women-identified people are doing at the grassroots to secure peace, security, and human rights in their communities around the world. Our vision with IGLE is to transform the University of Denver into a leader in the field of women's leadership, with a particular focus on how women are playing essential roles leading grassroots movements for social change. Our inaugural IGLE Summer Institute, which launched yesterday, brought 15 incredible frontline activists from all over the world right here in this building, in this room actually, to engage in a workshop with some of the world's foremost experts on nonviolent civil resistance. We have incredible activists in the room. They've played vital roles in launching the Ukrainian revolution, championing peace in Colombia, fighting for environmental sustainability and women's empowerment in Nigeria, mobilizing a pan-African youth movement, and the list goes on and on. To be honest, the last few days have been incredibly humbling for me. There is so much going on in the world and in our own country right now that is, frankly, terrifying and that has shaken many of us deeply. But getting to learn about the work that these women are doing in their communities against often incredible odds has given me a renewed sense of hope and optimism about the future. Women will and must play essential roles in creating a more peaceful, just, and secure world, and must be at the center of conversations about how to work nonviolently for progressive social change. So I want to introduce you to my friend and colleague, the incredible Erica Chenoweth, who is the co-director of this institute.
Thank you, Marie, and welcome all friends for joining us for this inaugural keynote of the Inclusive Global Leadership Institute. I'm Erica Chenoweth. I'm co-director of the Institute with Marie, and I'm a professor here at the Joseph Korbel School at the University of Denver. Like Marie said, the event so far has been a humbling opportunity to reflect on the power of community and solidarity among women struggling on the front lines of grassroots movements around the world. I want to take a quick moment just to thank a few people who've been making this event so far excellent and don't always get a lot of praise for the work that they do to make sure that everyone has a successful event. So in particular, I'd like to thank Ann Irving, who's standing here, who's a wonderful staff member in advancement at the university. I want to thank Rachel Stevens and Jill Haro, if you can be recognized. Both members of the C Center staff. Debbie Avant, if you're here. She's the chair of the C Center. And if we have friends in the room who were part of the conception or the conceiving of IGLE, from writing the sort of white paper that nudged us into action here at the University of Denver, we have some local and actually national friends who are here who really helped to conceive this project and brought it to the university for us to consider kind of shepherding into existence. So if you were part of that project, you know who you are. Please stand now so that we can recognize you with our thanks. Thank you so much, and hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit more about that for those of you who are curious after the talk tonight at the reception, which we invite you all to join us for. Now it's my great privilege to introduce you to Dr. Pardis Mahdavi, the Senior Associate Dean of the Joseph Korbel School here at the University of Denver. Professor Mahdavi is an anthropologist who joins our Korbel community from Pomona College, where she was a full professor and department chair of the Department of Anthropology. Her research focuses on the intersection between gender, sexuality, and politics. She's the author of many books and dozens of articles on human trafficking, gender and sexuality, and post-revolutionary Iran, and labor and migration throughout the world. She holds a PhD and 2 master's degrees from Columbia University and a BA from Occidental College. Since coming to DU just 3 weeks ago, Professor Mahdavi has already become a great champion of IGLY, and Marie and I are delighted to welcome her to the dais to introduce our keynote speaker this evening.
Thank you so much to Erica and to Marie. Good evening and welcome once again to Denver, to Corbell, and to IGLY. It is an absolute honor to have the privilege of welcoming you and also to introduce this evening's speaker. I think that we are in a moment where the world needs IGLY and conversations like this more than ever, and where more bridges need to be built between academia and activism, not just here, but around the world. This is something that many of us have dedicated our lives to, and it is so rewarding to hear and meet so many fellow travelers in this difficult and at times Sisyphusian journey. It is an honor to share these spaces with you. I now have the very great privilege of introducing another fellow traveler who has inspired millions on this journey during what feels like very dark times. Campus climates, for instance, as many of you know, have been heating up in the last few years. Last year, I walked into my classrooms and the mood oscillated between anger, numbness, confusion, and chaos. What can be done, students asked. Where do we put our energy, and what do we do next? In the midst of all this, we need the visionary guidance of activists such as people in the room, and most particularly tonight's speaker. Specifically, someone like Carmen Perez, whose activism leads with the 3 I's of inclusion, intersectionality, and inspiration. Carmen Perez is a visionary woman in modern-day activism. She has dedicated 20 years to advocating for many of today's important civil rights issues, including mass incarceration, gender equity, violence prevention, racial healing, and community policing. As the executive director of the Gathering for Justice, a nonprofit founded by legendary artist and activist Harry Belafonte, Carmen has crossed the globe promoting peace through civil and human rights, building alternatives to incarceration and violence, and providing commentary and guidance for state and federal policy creation. Her work providing cultural, spiritual, and educational events, as well as individual support to incarcerated youth inside of juvenile detention centers and prisons in California and New York, has led Carmen to work in prisons across the globe in places such as El Salvador and Venezuela. Carmen is the co-founder of Justice League New York City and the founder of Justice League California, 2 state-based task forces for advancing a juvenile and criminal justice reform agenda. She has organized numerous national convenings, including Growing Up Locked Down conferences on juvenile justice, as well as leading the March to Justice, a 250-mile march through 5 states from New York City to Washington, D.C. A respected expert in the field of juvenile and criminal justice and system accountability, Carmen was invited to testify before the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. She was a featured speaker and co-convener of the 20th anniversary of the Million Man March and has been featured in numerous media and TV outlets. Carmen's most recent work, which I think many of us can appreciate and relate to, is her role as the national co-chair of the Women's March on Washington, which drew over 5 million people across the globe who marched in resistance of hate and bigotry, affirming women of all identities' rights as human beings. Please help me welcome Carmen Perez.
Thank you so much for that long, beautiful introduction. I forget that I've been in my field for 20 years, and I'm like, oh my God, I've done all that. Imagine the next 20 years and the next 40 years to come. I also want to thank Marie and Erica for inviting me to be here. It's truly an honor. And I also want to take the time to thank Rachel, who worked with my assistant, Bria, who's here with me. It's always important as we do this work that we also bring other people along. And so it's truly an honor as I get to travel here to Denver that I bring not only my assistant, because she is far greater than just an assistant. She's somebody who graduated Yale last year, was working in Singapore, and also helped me survive the Women's March. And so I want to give it up for Bria. So I also want to congratulate all of you for being here and all your phenomenal work around the world. It's important that we get to see people from different walks of life that are doing this work. And as somebody who's been in other countries organizing in prisons, it's truly an honor to be in the presence of all of you. So thank you for being here, and congratulations for being part of this institute. So, Denver, what's up? I could breathe. I'm so happy to be here. I can't tell you how beautiful Denver is and how nice it is to be around people that are actually really, really nice. So thank you for being so kind to us, New Yorkers, and I come by the way of California, but thank you for just inviting us to your community. I think about my activism, and I never knew I was an activist. I didn't have that title when I was 19 years old or when I was 17. What brought me to this work was when I was walking down the aisle on my 17th birthday. I didn't realize it was my birthday that day, but I remember walking down the aisle of St. Anthony's Church, and I looked up, and there were 2 balloons, and it said, "Happy birthday, Carmen and Patricia." And those balloons were actually right next to my sister's casket. You see, on January 21st of 1994, we were burying my sister, who was a day and 2 years older than me. She was killed in a one-vehicular car accident and died at the hands of her friends. And so my life drastically changed from that moment on. My mother didn't allow me to trust people that I called friends for many years. And so I could have sat back and mourned and lived in my mourning, but I actually felt it was my responsibility to make sure that no other girl ever faced what my sister faced. She faced loneliness. She faced depression. She faced never feeling as though she was good enough. And I think that's what happens when you're a teenager, right? I know many of us have experienced that. But you see, I grew up playing basketball. And so from the age of 5 all the way to college, I created my own family. I created a team. I had a coach that believed in me, and I had a positive outlet. When things weren't going right at home, I was able to run it off. I was able to take it to the hole. I was able to shoot it off, which she didn't have the same things that I did. And so I grew up with the duality of both the victim and quote unquote, the offender. My brother had been in and out the system growing up. And I just thought that was a way of life. I thought other people grew up the same way, having somebody in their life incarcerated. I didn't realize that that wasn't normal. And so the way in which I was reborn, I wanted to end my life. And I did. I ended it in Southern California, and I got to go to UC Santa Cruz. And I studied psychology because I wanted to help people. I wanted to make a difference in young people's lives. And so I started working with young people that were incarcerated because I saw myself in them. I knew that the little girl that I was right across was somebody who'd probably faced the same things that I did. And so it wasn't my role to heal her. It wasn't my role to tell her what to do. It was my role to create an environment where she felt safe. And so I did that for many years. And I was under the mentorship of somebody by the name of Nane Alejandres, who taught me what servant leadership was. He taught me to find the answers within myself and that I was a leader. And that's why it's important to always cultivate the younger generation, because I wouldn't be standing in front of you if somebody had not taken the time to mentor me or to femtor me. And so my journey began many, many years ago. And it's what prepared me to actually organize the Women's March. I was the national organizing director for the Gathering for Justice, and I slept on benches. I slept on floors in different cities across this country, like Columbus. I had never heard of Columbus. I was sharing that with somebody earlier. But I knew who Columbus was, Christopher Columbus. I just didn't know where Columbus was. And so I remember being dropped off there, and it was a rainy day, and I got to organize in different communities in Columbus. And that became one of my favorite cities to organize in. Even though I was this girl from Southern California, living on the beach in Santa Cruz, going into prisons, working with men that were incarcerated and working with youth that were incarcerated and formerly incarcerated, my role was no longer just to work with those that were impacted by incarceration. My role was to actually bring people together and to meet people where they were and build coalitions. And it wasn't about Carmen Perez going into a community and saying, I know what you're going through. It was about listening, meeting people where they were and championing them to my cause. It's what my mentor, Mr. Belafonte, teaches me. Even though I don't want to meet with some of the people he introduces me to, he says, we have to champion them to our cause, grounded in an ideology bigger than myself, which is Kingian nonviolence. Kingian nonviolence is the ideology of Dr. King. So all the organizing that I did across this country, all the prisons that I entered around the world, the people I got to interact with prepared me to be one of the national co-chairs of the Women's March. Because it would have been easy to fight against Trump. Everybody wanted to go against Trump, right? Everybody was like, F Trump. Everybody I knew said that. But you see, for me, it was about attacking the forces of evil, not people doing evil. When I fight against police brutality, I don't think that police officers are bad people. It's the institutions that perpetuate these cycles of racism and separatism. So it was about fighting institutions. And so when I got the call on November 10th, because there was a woman by the name of Teresa Shook who put up the post. And when she woke up the next morning, there were 10,000 women marching with her. And they didn't have a permit. They didn't have a policy table or policy priorities. They didn't have anything. I don't even think many of those women that said they were marching had their flights. But I was called on a Friday morning because as many Americans, and I believe also people from around the globe, felt devastated. I felt like it was that morning on January 21st, 1994. I remember my mother calling me and she said, "Stop carrying the world on your shoulders, Carmen. It's not that bad." And I was like, how could you tell me it's not that bad, Mom, when this man is talking about deporting you back to a country you have not been to since you were 16 years old? So you tell me that it's not that bad when I'm hearing that my Muslim brothers and sisters are not allowed or welcome in this country, when I'm hearing that my Latino brothers and sisters who are undocumented will be deported. And she said, "I'm only here to remind you that you're not to carry the world on your shoulders. So you could debate me all you want, but I want to remind you that I love you." And that meant a lot to me because she is fearless. I think I'm bad and fearless. My mom is way more fearless than I am. But what was interesting is I got a call, and there was a voice on the other line by the name of Michael Skolnick. And Michael Skolnick is on my board of directors. And so, of course, I'm going to answer his call. And there was 3 other voices as well. So it was like somebody on 3-way, another person on 3-way. So we were like on 5-way, 6-way. And I could hear the women talking about the Women's March on Washington, which was originally called the Million Women's March, which completely erased the march that happened 20 years in Philadelphia planned by Black women, right? And so initially when I saw that post, I didn't respond to it. I didn't really care. I didn't want to march. I had led a 250-mile march, 9 days. I was still tired from 2 years before. But all that to say is that Michael Skolnick was so enthusiastic about calling us. And Tamika Mallory, my other national co-chair, was on the line. And he said, "I know the exact women who know how to plan marches in their sleep." And so we got involved. And I didn't get involved because I felt it was important for me to have another job title. As you can tell from my bio, I run a national organization. I run 2 state-based task force. But I do all that because I have dynamic teams. It's the only reason I actually do all the work that I do. But so I told myself, of course I will join. And the reason why I felt it was important for me to join is because I knew that I could bring communities together that other organizations or people couldn't. And I wanted to make sure that the most marginalized communities were at the center. What did that mean? That those that were actually the targets of Trump's rhetoric were actually the ones that we were looking at protecting. So that was women, that was the Muslim community, Latinos, and African Americans. And not to say that no one else mattered, because everyone matters. But we wanted to make sure that those were the folks that we were centering. And so Tamika Mallory, myself, and one of our teammates went to meet the women that we were on the other line with our little binder, and we're like, yeah, we're gonna plan this march. You know, when you think you have all the answers in a binder. How many of you have ever done that before? Nobody? Just me? We had it all squared out. We're like, this is the Bible for organizing a march, and we're gonna organize a march. But there was a lot more work that we needed to do internally. We had to have the very courageous conversations around race and privilege. In the beginning, everything was about a permit, not understanding that the permit is not something physical. It's a process. So I think it was the Washington Post or one of those media outlets that blasted us and said they don't have a permit, they're not organized, they're women. However, there was Reverend Al Sharpton who was planning a march before us, and I know he was never asked. And when I talked to Harry Belafonte about organizing the original March on Washington, they said they didn't have permits. So why is everybody concerned about permits? It was a distraction. And so as I was responsible for hubbing the Women's March underneath my organization, The Gathering, so that we could provide administrative service to the Women's March because nobody knew who the Women's March was, right? As I talked to Mr. Belafonte and I said, hey, Mr. B, I need your help. He's like, what are you getting me into this time? I said, well, we still need a march, sir. It doesn't matter if it's 50-something years later, we're still marching. But you know, we moved on from the permit, and then people were asking, what are you marching for? And that was a great question because while we had planned the 250-mile march, we had marched for 3 criminal justice reform bills. For me, that was easy. That's my expertise, that's my background. But I think it was more challenging for us to identify what women cared about because there's so many women that care about different issues. We are not monolithic. We don't just live in one community or navigate in one role. We are mothers, we are daughters, we are sisters of formerly incarcerated people, some of us. Some of us are daughters of undocumented parents. So we navigate through these multiple worlds, and it's what we call intersectionality. And you know, we have professors in here, so I'm not gonna go into the whole definition about it. I'm just teaching you what my professor from UC Santa Cruz taught me. She talked about us being intersectional. And so I thought, okay, let's identify people from across the country who are experts in different fields, from reproductive justice, immigration reform, criminal justice, environmental justice, indigenous rights, Muslim rights. Let's bring them all together. And people were like, are you crazy? And I was like, it takes a little bit of crazy to plan marches. So yes, I'm crazy. Why? Because I believe that we can create the beloved community that Dr. King talked about. I believe that. And so I'm gonna do everything in my power to bring people together because I am a bridge keeper. I am the bridge between the youth and the elders, those that have access, those that don't, grassroots communities, policymakers. I am the bridge, and I'm a bridge keeper. So yes, I believe that we could bring people together if we create a process where they feel seen and heard. And so we put it out there. We had 27 individuals come back to us and say, we want to be part of your policy team. They were representatives from indigenous rights, trans rights, LGBTQIA, different folks. And we're like, oh my God, Linda, we did it. Now we actually have to produce something. So how are we going to get them to actually work together? Our request was simple. We said, we want all of you to have a high impact and a low ego. We want to make sure that all of you come together thinking about intersectionality through a gender lens. And we're going to create a transparent process. So you're going to have to learn how to use Google Docs. And so we had multiple meetings, and people could actually see what they wrote and who erased it, right? That's what our transparent process was. We didn't go and talk to any developers of a new app or we went to Google and said, we're going to use Google Docs. And sure enough, within 2 weeks, people began to craft what they felt was important. And we had conference calls, and it wasn't easy, but we trusted one another. And the process was open. The process was inclusive. And I know that we could have done better because the march was not perfect. We only had 9 to 10 weeks to plan this march. So to bring out 5 million people, that's pretty all right? That's pretty okay. We did okay. We also got a lot of criticism. But we grounded our organizing in Kingian nonviolence. So we would say, suspend your first judgment. Gather more information. Create the beloved community that you feel is part of Dr. King's vision. And we were having those conversations. We had little kids put out videos of what Kingian nonviolence meant to them. We were doing Facebook Lives around race and immigration reform, trying to have conversations, what we call daring discussions. Our social media was receiving so much traction. We were also having conversations in real time, and we were actually responding to that. And although there were times when I just wanted to pull the covers over my head, I could not give up. Why? Because my community depended on it. Why? Because my children, which I don't have physically, depended on it. Your children depended on it. And I knew that it was my responsibility from everything that I had been through, from the moment that I walked down that aisle when my sister Patricia was being buried, to the time when I was sleeping on benches and floors, to the time I went into the prisons of El Salvador to help broker a peace truce between MS-13 and 18th Street, to the time when I got that call, I knew it was my responsibility. And so I gave my soul to the Women's March. I gave my heart every single day. And it was not easy. But when you have intention and you are grounded with love, grounded in love and revolutionary love, anything is possible because there were 5.2 million of you that came out. And you should give yourself an applause for that. There's a quote I remember getting on a call with Dr. Bernice King. And she had said that her mom, during the planning of the original March on Washington, had brought on over 700 partners. And mind you, 700. Mind you, I was like, how many? And she said 700. They had a year to plan the march. And so I got off the phone and I told my colleagues, we're about to bring on 200 partners. And but I really was lying to them because we ended up bringing 520 partners in 9 weeks. And so what my role alone was to house the Women's March under my organization, to provide the training in Kingian nonviolence and the ideology, to bring the elders who became our honorary co-chairs along with the 4 national co-chairs, to bring and to talk to influencers to participate in the march, as well as do the program, the partners, and the policy, all having 3 full-time jobs. And so when people say that Superman's coming, or the new Superwoman, right? They're not coming. No one's coming to save you. No one. We are the ones we've been waiting for. You are here to save yourself and to bring other people along. And that's why I feel that I hope that I could be an example to all of you when you think you can't make it. When you're turning on the TV and you're looking at Charlottesville, there are people that stepped off today in Charlottesville marching 112 miles to DC. Did you all know that? Today they stepped off. Bob Bland, my 4th national co-chair, is stepping off right now. I had a conference call with her and I was like, "Are you excited?" She's like, "I've never done anything like this in my life." I said, "But you got this, Bob. This is your turn. I marched. I'm not done marching, but I'm here to talk to all of you to remind you that every single day there are people doing things for your liberation." There's a woman by the name of Linda Sarsour. Have you all heard of her? I love Linda. I spend time with Linda every single day. She's a woman that is committed to the liberation of all our people, regardless of what the tabloids say. I know her. I travel with her. I get to spend time with her children. And she taught me something very important a couple years ago when I first met her. I remember being on a panel with her at the United Nations. And she said, "What are you doing after this?" And I said, "I'm going to hang out with you." She's like, "Okay, I'm going to a rally." And when she spoke at the rally, she quoted an Aboriginal woman by the name of Leela Watson. And she said, "If you are here to help me, don't waste your time. But if you are here because your liberation is bound with mine, then let us work with one another." And so are you all ready to work with one another? Are you all ready to fight against injustice? Or are you here to be on the sidelines and be a spectator? Because growing up, I won championships. Southern Municipal Athletic Federation, SMAF, which was Southern California Basketball Championships. And what I learned was to build teams. I learned that I had to trust in my point guard and my power forward. And that my coach, every time we set a foot on that court, we were to win. And it meant that it was all of us. And so when people are on the sidelines talking about Carmen has a blue streak in her hair, I can't believe she's wearing red lipstick, it's not all they say about me. They say worse things. I say, come on in the court. Let's see what you could do. Because it's easy to talk about what people say or don't say. It's easy to judge somebody, right? Didn't I say suspend your first judgment? How many times do we actually do that? How many times do we suspend our... I know I judge people. I look at people's shoes. I'm like, how long have they been marching? Not really. I try not to. But I know that's what happens. And imagine a society where we were grounded in an ideology where we actually saw each other for our humanity, where we believed in Ubuntu and in Lakesh. You are my other me. I am your other you. But we don't, because we're too busy trying to dismiss one another. We're too busy criticizing the Women's March and how it didn't have enough labor in it, or it didn't have enough men in it. There was plenty of men. I ran into all kinds of men. I was like, hey. I'm joking. It was grandfathers with their wives and their son-in-laws and their daughters and their grandchildren. It was really beautiful to be at the Women's March and walk down when they told us we couldn't even march because there were so many people. But so we have to create entry points for people to get involved. And it's not about shaming people because they don't know, right? Because I don't know everything about the trans community. I don't know everything. I'm an able-bodied woman. I don't know everything about ADA, But it's important we make space and leave a chair for them to be at the table. Because it's not always about us being at the table. If we sometimes take up too much space, then how is anybody else going to feel welcomed? Another reason, another thought that came to my mind when I got asked to be part of the Women's March is I was like, of course I'm going to be there. I'm going to make sure we're at the table and we're setting the menu because I'm not trying to be on the menu, right? And how many times do we feel that somebody else needs to do something for us? How many times do we feel that, you know what, I don't need to do that. I don't want to talk to people. We had a conversation during dinner about race. We have a lot of woke white people right now. And what I say to you is welcome. I welcome you to our cause. But I will also say you have to do the deep work. I have a sister, she's 12 years older than me, and she looks very indigenous. And I would never put her in a position for her to talk about race because she has not done the work that I've done. She doesn't have a race analysis. She also, even though she's been discriminated against and she's been called an Indian and she's been called this and this and this and that, but she's not the right one to have a conversation about how important it is for us to listen. And so it's important that we study each other's movements. And I'm only going to talk about the U.S. for right now, just because that's kind of what I feel is important, because we don't do enough learning about one another. The United Farm Worker movement is not the same as the Chicano movement. Did you all know that? Because Corky Gonzalez is from Colorado, right? The founder of the Chicano movement. Proud, give it up for Corky. I love him. I wish I met him. Also, the Black liberation movement was not the same as the civil rights movement. And we also need to think about the indigenous movement and the American Indian movement. And what I love to do, and I don't know if you all have time, but I used to spin in the morning when I was home. And I would put my computer on a documentary and learn about Gracie Lee Boggs and learn about all these different movements that happen. And also I learned about what was happening in Germany because, some of those policies get exported back over here, right? We actually inherited Trump, who's not originally from here, or his family isn't. So we also have to learn the opposition. We have to learn what they're doing because at this moment, they are adopting our chants. They are adopting our strategies so that they could integrate into our movements and break us up. So it's important that we understand not only history, because history repeats itself, but that we understand how we're all interconnected. How am I connected to a woman that is from Tennessee? Or even a man? How am I connected? Anybody have an answer? Yeah, we're all citizens of America. Has anyone ever read the letter from a Birmingham jail from Dr. King? That's a powerful letter because he talks about not being an outsider. Oftentimes when we're marching, we get told, how dare you come into our city and not ask for permission? I'm like, who am I supposed to call? Don't come into my city. That is very narcissistic. As though I'm the one who's a gatekeeper to New York City or to Oxnard, California, or Santa Cruz, California. But that is done by some of our fellow activists. And I reference back to the letter of a Birmingham jail where he says we are all citizens of the United States. And then there's another powerful quote that he talks about, injustice to one is, I'm not saying, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And so again, I want to take the time to remind you all of your greatness. There are people who are sitting here who have paved the way for many of us. We're not the first marchers. How many of you all marched 20 years ago? 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. You see, these individuals in this room have been marching for us for decades. And we need to honor those in the room that are our elders. It's about intergenerational relationships. We're not perfect. And I know I'm not a perfect activist. Like I said, I didn't even know what that word was before, because we put labels on things that separate us. I now have a label. I'm an executive director. I'm the co-founder. I'm the national co-chair. You know, I'm really someone's daughter, and I like to dance hip-hop and break dance and sometimes drink a little bit of wine or sake. Not in Denver, though, because if you have 2 glasses of wine, you get really turned. Last night, I had a margarita with my dinner, and I was like, oh, my God, I think I need to go to sleep. It was too much. The altitude, is that what's going on in Denver? Okay, yeah, somebody should have told us before we came here, because I've been drinking water ever since. I'm like, I need some more water. I need some more water. But again, this is about, reminding all of you of your greatness. Just because we live in this country doesn't mean that our movements are not connected. Just because I care about criminal justice or gender justice or racial justice doesn't mean that I'm not concerned about immigration reform or indigenous rights. There is something powerful about us being able to come together, to collaborate, and that's what you saw in the Women's March. We didn't just have 4 national co-chairs, which were Linda Sarsour, Tamika Mallory, Bob Bland, and myself. There were 70 national organizers. There were 400 state coordinators and 90 global coordinators, working every single day to make sure that people felt connected to something that larger than themselves. And we still got criticized saying that we didn't invite certain communities. We still got criticized saying that representation was not at the level of leadership. We still got criticized saying that nobody knew what people were marching for. But you know what? We did it, and we committed our hearts. And that is what can happen when you believe in something larger than yourself, and you connect to the person next to you, and you say, I'm willing to do this with you, because I'm here to show up for you as you are here to show up for me. So thank you for having me. I applaud all of you for being here, and I'm going to continue to fight every single day. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I don't know what to do.
All right. So we do have a little bit of time for questions. We have a microphone set up on the side of the room, so if people would be gracious enough to line up. I'd also like to invite you to keep your comments brief, just in the interest of letting as many folks get a question or a comment in as possible. And as the moderator, I will try to jump in to keep us moving, just again in the interest of inclusivity and making sure a lot of voices get to be heard and all the questions get to be asked. So with that, I think, yes, great, we have our, and so like I said, if you have a question, if you would be so kind as to line up, so we have kind of an order, a natural order there, and a sense for how many questions we have and how much time we have.
There we go. Okay, thank you again so much. My name is Annie, and I think I maybe saw a preview of March 2018, like a March of 2018. I don't know if you're involved or if you have any comments or previews on what is ahead for the Women's March, but if you have anything, I would love to hear it. Thank you.
We will be having a women's convention in Detroit on October 27th, 8th, and 9th. And so all that information is currently, I'm sorry, I'm looking at like Bria. She's the one that like runs my life right now, and it's really beautiful to have somebody remind you of what's happening tomorrow. So the Women's Convention is really focusing on the 2018 midterm elections. And so I'm sure, I think I shared this earlier, is prior to the Women's March, there were 900 women who were running for office. Since the Women's March, there are 17,000 women who are now running for office. So we just want to encourage all of you women to not only think about, city council, but also think about your community boards. What's in your community? Like, run for office. We need more women voices out there, but we are going to be focusing on the 2018 elections. We're going to have training, workshops, organizing. It's going to be amazing. We're looking at also having speakers that have big names, way bigger names than myself. And so it should be a place where women are able to connect.
Hi, I'm Nadia. I was wondering if you have any advice for people who are kind of new in activism, just to kind of keep from getting discouraged when things don't go how they were expecting or how they were hoping it would go.
Oh, man. I work for Harry Belafonte. Mr. Belafonte is 90 years old. I just sat in the room with him and Colin Kaepernick. And it was really beautiful to see Mr. B, we call him Mr. B, talking about how he's been an activist for 70 years. And when I want to feel tired, I think about him. And I cannot complain. And that's that I'm in a city every single day and still running my organization and the Women's March. But what I will say to you is, you have to keep your eyes on the prize. What is the prize for you? What tugs at your heart? We think about organizers or activists being seasoned. We also have to understand a lot of the women that were in the Women's March, Bob Bland was a fashion designer. There were other women who were chefs and yoga instructors. We are all activists. We just haven't necessarily been activated. Right? There's a moment in time that we feel like I knew I was going to change the world since I was little. My sister is 12 years older than me, and I used to tell her I was 31 flavors. I was international. I was really witty with things. I don't know where I got it from. But, for me, I don't have the right to feel tired because I need to continue to inspire people. I feel that's my role in the world. I have many roles. And so when you are tired, I will just say, take a nap. It's that simple. Get some rest. There's no magic solution or blueprint on how do you keep going, but you have to check in with yourself. I'm spiritually grounded. I pray all the time. I do my morning practice. I connect to something larger than myself, and that's what fuels me to keep on going and not worry about the sleep that I need. It's gonna happen, but I will say, it's simple. If you're tired, take a nap. If the issue that you care about isn't winning, then let somebody else do that work, because criminal justice wasn't sexy up until 5 years ago. I've been working on criminal justice reform since I was 17 years old, and there were many times when nobody wanted to talk about it. They used to tell me, why do you work with those people? Why do you do that? You're too pretty. And I used to be like, well, how could you even say that, right? Michelle Alexander brought that to academia that then brought a whole new conversation. Barack Obama was the first president to go into a prison. For me, that was a victory. So pass the baton, because it's a relay.
Hi, my name is Christine, and so I have a question specific to post-Women's March. So from my observation, I'm a transplant here, but I've been here 10 years. Definitely, there's been activation, okay, bar none. However, be that I am in academia, I'm part of the National Women's Association, there was critique, okay? Melissa Harris Perry was spearheading the critique about intersectionality. And so my question is that what are the leaders within the Women's March movement doing to prevent the siloing off that typically happens when movements build momentum? Because during the Chicano power movement, you had the nationalists versus the feminists, and some of that was happening here as far as, who and what are you loyal to? And it occurred to me, the leaders within the Women's March, to continue the momentum, can they spearhead some sort of, through your Google chat technology, SOS, mobilizing, strategizing, conferences, to keep the bridge, to keep the consensus?
So that's why we're having the Women's Convention in October, and people were saying, how crazy are you to actually organize a convention when you just came off the cuff of organizing the Women's March? So I love the question that you pose. I often think about, what are you willing to do? So we can ask the question of leaders like Corky Gonzalez or Aida Hurtado, who's an amazing Chicana feminist. But I also think about, what's my personal responsibility in that? And we're actually really close with Melissa Harris Perry, which is really interesting because even after the Women's March, she had to speak at her university that she now runs a department at. But I always say, it's really easy to point the finger, right? My mom taught me this. I didn't learn this in no feminist class. It's easy to point the finger, but there's three pointing back at us. And sometimes we're the largest critics of movements outside of us because we feel left out. And I feel that it's important for us to ask ourselves, what are we willing to actually provide a solution on? We ask ourselves every single day within the Women's March. The Women's March is not perfect. There's still a lot of learning to do. We created a 501c4 so that we could actually do campaigning and bringing women into office. And so we're building an infrastructure for that. I don't know if it's safe to say that it is the responsibility of the women leaders to do away with the silos that happen in our communities. We were talking earlier today, she's from Ukraine, this beautiful woman right here, and she was talking about even within her own country, there's a lot of silos. I was like, there's a lot of silos even within my own criminal justice field, right? There are gatekeepers. There are people who don't want others to be involved. And I don't know if we, as leaders of the Women's March or leaders of Black Lives Matter or the LGBTQIA movement, can actually do away with that human behavior. But I know we welcome collaboration. We collaborate with Black Lives Matter. We collaborate with indigenous groups. We collaborate with, and we try to be that example. But again, I think what we're trying to do is to make sure that we bring people to the convention, that we constantly talk about intentionality, collaboration, but I don't know if we could do away with the behavior that we've seen modeled in many movements before us. But it's certainly our intention to do so. Thank you.
Hi,
Hi.
My name is Leela. I'm a student here at DU, but I'm also a paralegal at a criminal defense forum that specializes in juvenile defense. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for all the work that you do, because we see these clients that are refugees, that are immigrants, that are minorities every day, and all the work you do touches them in every single way, all throughout the process.
Thank you.
My question is, what would you say to these kids who are getting the short end of the deal, who are still facing a bunch of issues with the system, who are being discriminated against, and who are generally just suffering because of the system that we have created?
So I don't know what I would say to them, but what I tell young people all the time is, you are loved, necessary, and you are powerful. I work with youth that are incarcerated, and I call them doctors. So Dr. Thompson, Dr. Lopez, I always say to them, the bar is raised for them right here. My bar is raised right here. When I coached varsity high school basketball girls, I think you're supposed to have a 2.0. They had to get a 3.5. They hated me, but they all went away to college. It's about the way in which you interact with these young people and how you make them feel seen and heard and valued. And I know that's something hard to take on, because you also take that emotion home with you. And as somebody who worked with young people, even as a probation officer, I would take my work home. But just remind them of humanity and of their beauty, and try to figure out how you dismantle, could you create a coalition of people who care, to work harder to make sure that these young people actually have a wraparound of community that will support them through the process. And we could talk afterwards, because I've created several task force, one in Santa Cruz County to do gender responsive programming for girls regardless of them being in the system. And then another one was on system accountability. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Kay and I'm from Madagascar. I would like to know your position about those activists who get engaged into politics. Do you think that it's a good thing because you build trust with people who follow you for years? So do you think that it may make a difference in society? Have you ever thought about running for office, for instance?
Oh. Thank you for the question. So after the Women's March, there were a lot of posters that were saying Sarsour and Perez for president, vice president. And I went to my mentor, Harry Belafonte, and just joked about what my next phase of my life was gonna be. And he's like, well, I don't think you should run for office because you have to decide whether or not you wanna be the leader of the rebellion or the leader of a constituency. And he said that he worked alongside Congressman John Lewis. And he felt that Congressman John Lewis was more effective when he was part of SNCC and part of the movement versus him being a congressman. And so I don't necessarily discourage people to run who are activists. I think activists or any person who wants to run for office should run for office. At this moment, I have to sit down and continue to do my job.
With the fact that you're over this organization that has millions of people and followers, and it kind of caught lightning in a bottle, in a sense, along with good organizing and capturing the moment. How do you, as a leader of this organization and movement, stop from the normal cycle of organizations where you go from momentum and it being raw to an organization, to an institution, to a museum, to it dying? What risk are you taking to really ensure that you keep that rawness that kind of captured the attention of the whole nation and the whole world?
So that's a great question, and I think I learned lessons from the Gathering for Justice when we were just a movement, and then we became a nonprofit that then had people become decision makers of communities that they represented versus communities making decisions and having people represent them. And so doing that 15 years prior to the Women's March, I think for us is that we're asking people, if they are connected to the Women's March, that they continue to support the points of unity, our unity document, which are our policy priorities. But there are many organizations that have started within or after the Women's March. I think for us as leaders, we're still trying to figure it out, right? I'm not solely the Women's March. It's the reason why I always say I'm the executive director of the Gathering for Justice. There are many people who make up the Women's March, and I always want to recognize their work. You don't see them as visible as myself, Tamika, Linda, and Bob, but the work continues every single day with hundreds of people who commit, and we have to keep that rawness. Right now, we're looking for an executive director to oversee the 501c4, but we're also not looking for somebody who's gonna be a leader. We understand that there's something beautiful about decentralized structures, right? If you kill off the head of a spider, you know it will die. If you cut off the leg of a starfish, it multiplies. I think that's what we saw within the Women's March. But I think when, I don't have all the answers, neither do we at the Women's March. I think that we need to continue to uplift the work that is happening on the ground with local organizations, and we need to just be that vehicle to get the information out. So it's not about being the end-all, be-all organization, because that's not what the Women's March is. Our power is actually in the people who make up the Women's March from different organizations that we could support.
Thanks.
My name is Yvonne, and
Hi, Yvonne.
Thank you, hermana, and vaya con Dios, wherever you go with your higher power.
Thank you.
I'd like to discuss or have you say some words around your nonviolence versus violence. When you start out at 8-year-old, being on a labor picket line in Pueblo, Colorado at the CF&I, and the goons beat you up, and they beat your parents up, and the only way to make things work sometimes is violence. And then in high school, there's no girls' sports, so you can go and get a scholarship, and so little chicanitas don't have any hope, and so violence is a way to make things happen in high school to get girls' sports. Or you go to CU Boulder with Corky, and you know them, and in the Chicano movement, then you have 7 beautiful 18 and 19 and 20-year-old Chicanas and Chicanos blown up in Boulder, Colorado, and the violence is there. And you work with Russell Means to take over Yellow Thunder Camp and learn violence so that you can hold the land, the pasapa that is yours as a Native American. And then you work as a woman of color in an arena where you're in a non-traditional job and a man has power over you to say, hey, Yvonne, come here. And you do, because he's the boss. And then you get, well, I just wanted to see if I could make you come with my finger. And then you have lesbians of color who need their point of view represented amongst the European American gay and lesbian movement, so you need to do violent things to get a seat at the table. And then I hear you talk about the nonviolence that you believe in and that you do, and that's your philosophy. But many of us were given, it is better to die on your feet than to continue living on your knees. And that feels incredibly empowering. So I don't know that it's a balanced question that I'm asking you, but where does violence in any movement versus the nonviolence? Because sometimes when you have violence, things do move forward, and sometimes when you have nonviolence, things move forward. So as a woman of color, I've never seen another woman of color talking about nonviolence like you are, and I'd just like to kind of have you share your brain, pick your brain.
Of course. So first of all, I just want to thank you for being vulnerable and sharing all of that with us. Nonviolence is a process. I grew up in a violent home where we were whipped with horse whips. We didn't even own horses. I grew up in a violent community where there was gang violence, also police brutality. My brother was constantly being stopped by police and held at gunpoint when he would pick me up from my basketball games because my uniforms, my jerseys were red and blue, and in Southern California, that represented the Crips or the Bloods. So I grew up with violence, and that's the easy thing to do for me. That's why I say nonviolence is a process, because it takes a lot of discipline for you to be nonviolent. It doesn't mean that you are passive. In the study of nonviolence, you have to understand that there are not only 6 principles, but there are different steps to nonviolence. And so I also witnessed my mother being discriminated against, or my father being stopped by police, the federales, and his money taken and beat up. However, I was also taught to be courageous in a very different way, and not to say that violence, if you practice violence, then that's what you do. But I study nonviolence every single day, even when I'm being catcalled. And when I'm in the prisons of El Salvador, whether, I have to think about what you said in regards to the Zapata, that's Emiliano Zapata's quote, I'd rather die standing than live on my knees. And I think as Latino people, we live on our knees because we work in agriculture. And I often have to reconcile my path forward and what I train people to do, but it's a process. Any ideology that you practice is a process. And I also think my greatest weapon is actually my mouth and my heart. And I debate with people all the time. And I will, certainly disarm people with my mouth as well because of the love that I express and I show. And like I said, it's not easy. I am the target of death threats at this moment. I am the target of the NRA, who has put out 5 videos with my face calling me a violent agitator, a violent anarchist, not understanding that I'm grounded in an ideology that is bigger than myself that I've been studying for the past 20 years. And I also am the target of the New York Times, who has put out this very, this very negative image of who I am in this world. Do I fight back wanting to get my family members to kick their ass? I think about it. I definitely think about it, because I just had a family reunion. There was 400 of us, and there were 6 generations. And I was like, it's easy to get my cousins to come out to New York and beat somebody's ass. But sorry for the elders. I'm so sorry. I don't want to cuss. But I will say that that's not where my heart is. It's not what I do. I am prepared to die for the work that I do. And that means that I will show the way by living in a nonviolent world and creating that nonviolent space. And so I'm not saying that it's the right way for others. It's the right way for me. It's the right way for the people that I work and I collaborate with and that I try to teach every single day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So as a future educator, we learn a lot about including issues around social and political things in our classroom. So how would you recommend that teachers and educators include activism in their classroom and in their lessons?
So are you allowed to do that?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, is it?
At the school that I go to.
Oh, okay, because it's not like No Child Left Behind anymore? I don't really know, because I used to be with a teacher, and I remember like he and I would debate all the time because he couldn't incorporate some of the activist stuff that I was doing. So that's why I was asking.
No, I guess it's just like we've talked about it in classes a lot, and I think that our professors are trying to push us beyond what is expected of average teachers. And it's something that I'm really passionate about, and I just wonder how to toe that line and what advice you might give for teachers who want to include it without maybe overstepping their boundaries.
You know what I would ask? I would actually try to define what activism is for young people and ask them if they even consider themselves activists, and then try to figure out what they're passionate about, what they like. My niece, she's 15 years old. She's super cute. She's gonna start a Justice League little chapter in her high school. And I was like, why? Like, why do you wanna be an activist? And what do they say? The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And I just have to say I was so proud. So I was like, okay, I want to have a little conference call with her. And so my sister's like, does that mean she just calls you? I'm like, yes. But she's got to understand that these are now conference calls. It's no longer like talking about like sports in school. And so it's because I think she sees it. And so if you just introduce the concept, I think young people, there's a really great quote about like young people are actually very intelligent until we silence them, right? And I think that young people are their own leaders. I started when I was 17. I know SNCC, the people from SNCC were really young. And so if we just had more people, femtors like you in our lives, I think we'd all be activists at the age of something. But yeah, so just make sure like you define it what it is so they could understand, and then ask them what they really like. Yeah. And they'll probably start protesting around the school and doing shutdowns and all that stuff. And let me know if you need help, because I know some chants.
Sounds good. Thank you.